All right, everybody, we're back with a brand new Cabral Concept. Today is a show dedicated to a listener question. So every single weekend, if you're not familiar, we do our Cabral House Calls where we answer our community's questions. As we do every single weekend, we've been doing that now for about 8 years. Every once in a while, there's a question that comes in that I haven't answered yet and that I believe deserves to be a larger show. And a larger show is essentially 12 to 15 minutes or so that I want to go deep on one topic. So this individual asked, and it's not the first time that I've seen it, why might your blood work be elevated for vitamin B12 when you're not supplementing with B12? Because it's unlikely that you're eating enough vitamin B12 foods that it's really going to elevate your blood levels. So what could it be? So the only issue with the weekend shows is I just have to be careful that I don't come across as giving any medical-based advice or diagnosis. And of course, I am here to give you the underlying root cause, to share with you how to find that for yourself. I always want to be that second opinion that you're looking for. So of course, you can feel free to write in your question as well, just at stephencabral.com/askcabral. I'd love to be able to help the community. So that's what it's all about. But I wanted to follow up and I wanted to do a show on why your blood work might show elevated B12. So I'm going to go through the top 10 reasons here with you today, give you the most likely scenarios, but also I wanted to share with you that when you look at B12 on your blood, all it's showing is what's available. So it's not actually even the very best marker to look for. Now it matters. I want to talk about that. But if you really want to look at if you're utilizing B12, so say you're taking a nutritional supplement or you're eating high B12 foods or whatever it might be, if you want to actually look at if you're using the B12, you want to look at something called methylmalonic acid. Methylmalonic acid. So all that means is that when you use vitamin B12, methylcobalamin or adenosylcobalamin or cyanocobalamin, which is obviously not the most ideal type, but methylcobalamin works the best for the majority of people. You want to say, am I utilizing it? And if you are, well, then methylmalonic acid will be in an optimal range. The way that you most easily find that is on a urine-based test, not actually through blood work. And the reason is that your body utilizes it. It moves through the liver. It gets processed. It comes out through the urine from the kidneys. And that shows you use B12 as methylmalonic acid. That's on a test that you can run right at home called the Candida Metabolic and Vitamins Test. I can link that up here today at stephencabral.com/3280. You don't need a doctor to sign off for that one. Easy test to check out all of your vitamin levels and your gut function. All right, so now let's dive into it. Let's give you those top 10 reasons if your blood work shows elevated B12. All right. And this means without supplementation. If you have high B12, essentially, and you're supplementing, it can mean, well, you're just taking a good amount of B12. It's a water-soluble vitamin. Probably no big deal if it's not overly elevated. But the thing is, if you're not converting it and you don't know your methylmalonic acid level, well, that's the issue. You might not be converting it well enough. All right. Why may you not be converting it well? There might be liver-based dysfunction. And again, I don't want to provide you with any diagnosis or medical treatment plan, medical cure, anything like that. What I want to share with you is that you want to look into, is there an issue with the liver? Is the liver inflamed? Do you have non-alcoholic or alcoholic fatty liver disease? Do you have elevated liver enzymes? So if you're running B12 in your blood work, you should certainly be looking at two values called AST and ALT, which are liver-based enzymes that are going to give you a little bit deeper look into seeing if there is a liver-based issue that's disrupting your B12 storage or its release-based pathways. So that's important because remember, I'll show you my buddy Hank here. All right, so I've got Walter and Hank. These are my two models here. And essentially, as I typically do show you whenever you're watching the model here on video, and if you're not, I'll explain it to you. You have a large organ under the right side of the rib cage. And I always denote it as, well, this is the really dark red one on these models. And the reason why it's like that is that your blood is being filtered by that liver about every 10 minutes or so. Every 6 to 12 minutes, depends on how quickly it's moving through. Now, why that's important is that there's a lot of detoxification taking place in your liver, removing what's already been used up, but also a lot of enzymatic transactions happen there where the body's actually being able to then create usable things like thyroid hormone. T4 to T3 conversion happens in those liver cells, majority as well. All right, Walter just lost half his head. We're going to put him back down. All right, so here's the thing. Liver can be the first one. We want to check that out. The next one is a form of leukemia, or polycythemia vera, which leads to elevated B12 levels because of an increased production of something called haptocorrin. And why this is important is that it can bind up B12 in your blood. And so if you suspect that, or you've ever been told that by your doctor, this could be one of those specific reasons. The third one goes along with the liver, and that's the kidneys. So the kidneys and the liver, they really typically always work together. So behind the, we'll call it stomach pancreas-based area, right on top of the hip bones on your back, so basically your left and right side above the hip bones, you've got your two kidneys. On top of those kidneys sit the adrenals. Well, the kidneys are also filters of the blood. The liver typically gets first swipe at a lot of these toxins in the body, and hopefully there's not too much left because the kidneys don't have the same proliferative strength as the liver does, and they can actually start to become inflamed or break down much easier than the liver itself. And it doesn't repair itself as quickly as the liver does. So impaired kidney function or impaired kidney excretion. Remember, the kidneys are taking everything inside of the body as well, and it's not eliminated like it would through the stool with the liver, but it's eliminated through the kidneys to the bladder and then out as urine, right? So that's important to look at that. And any issue with B12 metabolism and excretion can actually happen in the kidneys. So if the body's not excreting it properly, it can start to build up in the blood. That could be one more reason for elevated B12. The next one is if you've ever been told you have an autoimmune dis-ease, especially one like lupus. This can lead to abnormal B12 metabolism or storage, meaning a buildup of B12 in the body, potentially the liver as well. This is important because if you say, well, what's the underlying root cause? You might say, oh, the underlying root cause of my high B12 is my autoimmune issue. Okay, that may be true. But then the autoimmune issue also has an underlying root cause. That's why sometimes people come in and say, I need to fix my elevated B12. Got it. Okay. But what's the real issue? Oh, you have lupus. Okay. Well, now what's the underlying root cause of lupus? Well, it could be food sensitivities, intestinal permeability, candida overgrowth, all sorts of issues. Okay. We find out what those are. Then we fix that, because that is more important to fixing your B12, because the underlying root cause of the B12 was the autoimmune. The underlying of the autoimmune was the potential stress-based issues, like I said, deficiencies, toxicities, gut permeability. Okay, so we fix that, and then everything in the body goes back to balance. So that's why when you're working with an integrative health practitioner, you want to work with someone that continues to peel back the onion, because what matters is that you get to the ultimate root cause. And they're typically for each individual, there's somewhere between like 3 and 4. It's never usually one thing. Like there is no silver bullet. Oh, if I just take berberine, my life will be good. If I just take NMN, my everything will be perfect. It doesn't work like that. So what happens is over time, there's certain breakdowns and compensations in the body. We can find out what those are through very simple at-home functional medicine lab tests. Now they're complex in their beauty, but it's very easy to do right at home, and an integrative health practitioner will read those for you. Okay. And then tell you obviously the personalized wellness plan. You're not going to get that on blood work. Blood work's amazing. You should run it every 6 months or at least every 12 weeks minimum. 12 months minimum. And I do myself, but that's for major disease state. Like if your blood work's off, you waited too long. And that's not your fault, because your PCP is not running for your vitamin levels, your mineral levels, your gut function, et cetera, which is really run on what's called the Big 5 labs. And again, I'll link those up at stephencabral.com/3280. All right. Next one is this: excessive release from your cells. Now, what does this mean? Well, think about it, our red blood cells and other cells, we'll just talk red blood cells. They're building up its own little storehouse. So we've got, let's just go with trillions, literally, of our red blood cells. Now, they're not all breaking down at once, which is great. But let's say we've got all these red blood cells, and they are storing iron. They're storing B12. They're storing B9 as folate. They're storing calcium, magnesium, some zinc, and some copper. So different nutrients that they need, but those are a lot of the ones that they need for oxygenation, right? Hemoglobin, hematocrit, et cetera, of the cell. And that shows up in your blood work. So you can actually look at this by running a complete blood count. So just like you're running your B12 in your blood, you want a CBC, a complete blood count. And if those numbers are high or low, well, it can mean high or low of the certain nutrients that we're talking about right now. But really, what we're talking about is total red blood cells. If these start to go lower because of a autoimmune issue or something like what's called hemolysis or cellular damage, they're breaking down too quickly, it can release more B12 in your blood. And that may show up as a lowered or an autoimmune process, or a lowered red blood cell and autoimmune-based process, where these red blood cells are breaking down too quickly from a more catabolic process. All right, the next one is a bacterial infection or an overgrowth. So what I look at very specifically is gut-based overgrowth. So a gut dysbiosis. It can even be good bacteria, but it can be overgrowth of good bacteria from antibiotic use, birth control, certain medications, proton pump inhibitors like acid blockers, et cetera, can cause this. Now, believe it or not, you could be taking B12, be on an acid blocker, not be able to absorb it very well, especially from food, because your body needs stomach acid and it needs very specific bacteria in the gut in order to be able to convert, especially a cyanocobalamin or food-based B12, in order to make it into a methylcobalamin, which just is a usable form of B12. So that's an important one to look at. Always look for those gut-based issues. Some of the random ones that would throw it off would be like a tuberculosis or sarcoidosis. Those could potentially cause elevated B12, sarcoidosis being a autoimmune issue, with tuberculosis being more of an infection. All right, the next one, probably not as common for many people, but there is so much unfortunate cancer in the world today. 1 out of every 3 people. It's moving towards 1 out of every 2, which is completely insane, like completely insane what we've done to our environment in order for so many people, even healthy people, to be getting cancer. And I know you'd say, well, it can't really happen to healthy people, but it can through exposure, right? Like that's the issue. Through exposure, we're seeing this. And so like they're doing the right things, they're eating the right foods, and then all of a sudden they get exposed to something, and now cancer of essentially the immune system is affected, which then allows this thing to begin to mutate inside of the body, which are the mutating cells, the cells that do not get the signal, the natural signal to go into what's called apoptosis, programmed cell death, whenever there's a mutation in the cells themselves. Or they're hiding from our white blood cells due to some anomaly where the white blood cells are not able to find those cancerous cells and then go after and remove them. So really important. Specifically, there's a couple out there called hepatocellular carcinoma, leukemia, and a few other ones which allow for elevated B12, but you would already have this diagnosis. Just a couple other ones. One would be a functional B12 deficiency. It's like, think of it this way. Many people have acid reflux, actually from too little stomach acid. I did a whole show on this. And I know that that doesn't make sense, but if I go back to my buddy Walter here, who only has half a head left, when we're looking at the stomach, there's actually, I'll take off his lungs here, I'll take off the liver, and I'm going to show you the bottom of the esophagus. So we've got the bottom of the esophagus right here, and there's a muscle there. The esophagus comes from basically the back of the throat down about a foot or so to the stomach. And at the bottom of that is called the lower esophageal sphincter. It's a muscle that closes in the presence of high stomach acid. Acid starts to be created in the stomach as food begins to go into the stomach, right? So there's a signal from the stomach cells themselves essentially back to the brain to start then creating stomach acid. And so when this happens, the lower esophageal sphincter begins to close tighter so the acid doesn't come up. Well, if there's not enough acid, there is not enough feedback to say, oh, we need to tighten up the lower esophageal sphincter so stomach acid doesn't come back up. That's one of the reasons why some people get acid reflux, is because that muscle doesn't tighten enough because they don't produce enough stomach acid, so the little that they do still comes up. Again, it's only one of the reasons, but it's a possibility. For B12, this is really important. So when we see that B12 levels might be elevated in the blood, as I was alluding to much earlier, it could be because they're not able to the B12 that you're taking in, that's in the blood, is not able to be actually utilized, methylated, to then be used by the cells. It is in these cases that we typically need to look at cofactors, B6, B9. Those are important. Sometimes magnesium, sometimes zinc, but also just making sure that you're getting a methylcobalamin, that you're not getting a supplement called cyanocobalamin through fortified-based food, which I'll just talk about that in a moment. All right, so let's go to that right now. So the last one is that sometimes, and this is, I think, really important to look at that, and this is basically 9 and 10, it's genetic issues and then fortified food. So I wouldn't worry about, there's something called MTHFR, so methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. So it's just basically a SNP. It's a single nucleotide polymorphism. It just goes back to our genetics. And there's many people. The numbers are wild right now, but it's at least 40% of the population that is not able to fully methylate. That means using essentially 3 main B vitamins: methylfolate, which is B9, methylcobalamin, which is B12, and then B6 as P5P, pyridoxal 5-phosphate. You don't need to know what any of those mean. It's just B6, B9, B12. Well, what happens is when they take them in from food, or they take them in from like a multi that you might get at like CVS or Rite Aid or Costco or, any of these places, they're very cheap forms of it. And when you have MTHFR-based gene issues, you might not be able to utilize those, and they start to build up in the blood. But one other place that you may not necessarily be looking for it is in fortified foods. That means some cereals and milks, meaning not milk, but like nut milks and things like that. They actually add these products to it because they're like, oh, now with higher levels of folate or folic acid and B12. But again, they're not the usable forms. They're not the healthy forms. They're more of a synthetic form that the body doesn't necessarily see. Whereas the methylcobalamin, that's B12, the body knows how to utilize that because it's already fully methylated. It's the bioavailable form, methylfolate, right? So instead of folic acid or even folate, it's methylfolate. It's already been methylated. Now the body can use it. And for B6, it's P5P, pyridoxal 5-phosphate. The body does a better job with B6 in general, but just letting you know that is one of the cofactors as well. You need a much smaller amount of B6 than you do of B9, which is folate, or B12. So those are all of the main reasons of why someone may have elevated B12 in their blood. Remember, there's not just one reason like you see on social media, right? But hopefully now you kind of go through this list, and if you have elevated B12, you say, all right, process of elimination, it could be these 2 or 3 things. I don't have elevated liver enzymes. Kidney function looks fine, meaning your BUN, your albumin, your creatinine, all those things are good. Okay, now I move on to my gut. Oh, it turns out I have elevated candida and bacterial overgrowth. Let me work on that. Right? So by process of elimination, you'll be able to figure this out. Hopefully this show was helpful. As always, do feel free to share this show with anyone you believe it could serve, and send them on over, and you can grab these links yourself at stephencabral.com/3280, since I will link up the show notes as well as those lab tests that you can run right at home for your methylcobalamin B12 levels. Take care, everybody. Have an amazing day. Thanks so much for tuning into today's show. Before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I want to make sure that you're getting our daily content, not missing out on anything functional medicine, wellness, weight gain, weight loss, anti-aging, living longer, stronger, and all of the most cutting-edge research. And if there's any topics you want to hear, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Take care.